in the healthcare market. And I work for a company called CSL Behring, which is a biopharmaceutical company. It's the third largest biopharmaceutical company in the world. And we have a rather unique business in the healthcare market. Since we're a pharmaceutical company, we don't run hospitals or employ doctors or anything like that. We're on the drug side of the business, the treatment and therapy side of the business. But we do have a rather unusual business in that we operate our own plasma collection centers. And that's because all the therapies produced by CSL Behring are based on human plasma. So we need human plasma as our raw material, and therefore we have a number of centers across the United States, over 250 as a matter of fact, and nearly 300 around the world. So we have a retail operations where people come in and donate their plasma. Then we take that plasma and we hand it over to the manufacturing side of the business, and they purify it and refine it into life-saving therapies for patients around the world. And then we also have the standard distribution and marketing and all those kind of things. We also have a business called Securus, which is the third largest manufacturer of flu vaccines around the world as well. So just to let you know, that's where we operate in the healthcare ecosystem as a pharmaceutical company and a provider of all those different medicines and drugs for rare diseases. So one of the use cases that I'd like to talk about today is we built a forecasting system. And we had taken a data scientist and dedicated them to the project. And they built the forecasting system over the span of 4 months. So we are working with data that went back 5 years in our operations. And we looked at the historical patterns, the weekly fluctuations, the yearly fluctuations, the seasonality of the business, and those kind of things. And we built a really accurate forecasting system that was in the single digits as far as error terms. So we were very excited about that. We rolled it out into the business. The business began using it, and then COVID hit. So that was a rather interesting phenomena for all of us, and in some cases a very dreadful and devastating phenomena for some. And my heart and condolences go out to people affected in a negative way by the COVID pandemic. But as everyone knows, or as many people know, predictive models are built using training data. So when you train a model, it is expected that the world will continue in the same general parameters that it did before, when you were training it. So when you have a situation like the COVID pandemic and the world changes dramatically, your forecasts are not as accurate as they were. So we went from single-digit error terms to double-digit error terms in the span of a few weeks. So it was really interesting. A number of people in the business who are very well versed in AI and models and data science said, yep, we fully expected that to be the case. The world has changed. Therefore, the model is probably not as accurate as it was. Other people use the opportunity to say, well, data science, it just doesn't work. It's all just a bunch of, hocus pocus, and it can't be relied on. Well, of course, we all know that when the world changes, your models have to change. So we went back and collected data, as we always do. That was not something that we had to do special. So we continued to collect data in the new world, in the way the world was changing and what was being represented to us in the data. Went back we waited for 4 weeks, or we were retraining constantly over those 4 weeks. And once we got 4 weeks into the new normal, which is, I hope this is not the new normal, but at least the situation that we find ourselves in now, the models were then trending back into single-digit error terms again. So now we have put the model back in, a new model, an updated model, into production, and it seems to do very well. So there's been all sorts of things said and mentioned about AI, the changing terms, changing errors, changing environment, all those kind of things. So you as an analytics professional need to be aware that these things are going to come out, and you just need to be ready for it. So as I'm going through this, if you have any questions or you want to talk about anything, please do type the questions into the chat. And magically, just as I said that, someone typed in a question into the chat window. I have more use cases to talk about, but I would really like to make this more of an interactive dialogue. So I'll read out the question and then I'll answer it. And if you have any follow-ups, just type that into the chat and we'll carry on that dialogue that way. Matt says, did you continue to operate off the model's forecast or did you do manual adjustments? There's 2 questions there. We did manual adjustments. We went in and said, okay, we've got a repressive effect on a few different things in the marketplace. So we added in, a marker to say to the model that we are in a new world and these additional effects need to be considered. And then we retrained the model, as I said, with the new normal. And obviously the forecast changed dramatically based on the new normal. So we do and are continuing to rely on the forecast, and it works better than any other forecast that we've seen so far. So yes, we do operate off the model's forecast, and we did some manual adjustments as well as retraining the model. So great question, Matt. Thank you very much for that. I was just thinking of something. I had it in my mind and then it went away. It comes back to me. I'll talk about it later. One of the other use cases that we worked on last year is that CSL Behring provides treatments for rare diseases like hemophilia and other diseases that affect a small number of the population. And we were looking at one of those indications and we wanted to find out, are there people out there that are not being accurately, or you're welcome, Matt, thank you, accurately being diagnosed or properly being diagnosed. One of the indications that CSL provides treatments for is called PID. And we were aware and are aware that PID presents itself in a wide range of indications. It looks like in some cases it's a allergic reaction. In some cases it looks in different ways. So patients end up going to a variety of healthcare provider specialists, trying to find out, what is actually happening to their body and what is the condition that they're experiencing. So it can take up to years for people to be accurately diagnosed with this condition. So we went and looked at all the patients that we knew in the world and we modeled them and said, hey, this is what it looks like. This is what the condition looks like. And we had the records from prescribing behavior and doctor's records and things like that we could use. So we came out and came up with a model and then ran it against general population data we had acquired from a third-party provider. And we found almost 16,000 people that were more than likely had this condition, but hadn't been accurately diagnosed. And those people were somewhere between 20 and 50% through their diagnostic journey, which, as I said, could take years. So I can imagine, if you had a condition that you had for years that was undiagnosed, that leads to a much lower quality of life. And we found also about 1,000 patients that were somewhere around 80 to 90% through their diagnostic journey. So they had been doing this for a long time. So that was really interesting insights to find from modeling a known patient population to applying it to a general population and seeing, who out there who we could help with our therapies. Another couple of questions have popped in. So let me ask and answer those myself. Could you name any specific model you used? Well, for the forecast model, we used a neural net with backpropagation, a convolutional neural net with backpropagation. In other models, we've used decision trees. We've used, we've used classical statistics too. So in some cases, the way I see the analytic continuum is that it starts out in descriptive statistics, goes up into predictive, prescriptive, simulation, and optimization. Those are the ranges we work in my group. If it's simply dashboarding and reporting and historical analysis, we don't really do much of that. So we tend more towards the analytical end of the spectrum. Chana asks, how will COVID-19 affect the drug discovery pipeline, especially clinical trials? Well, it affects every company differently, every pharma company differently. Clinical trials, as you rightly pointed out, are affected by COVID-19. If you can't have people come to a healthcare provider or to a hospital for the clinical trial, sometimes the clinical trial is slowed down, or it's deferred or put on hold, or in some cases, maybe even canceled. So it affects every clinical trial differently, because clinical trials are based on people, and people all have a different reaction to the COVID situation, the COVID pandemic. So I wish I could give you a better answer there. It's highly variable, and depending on the individual circumstances, I would say in the macro sense of it, that the drug discovery pipeline probably will not change in composition. Companies are focused on therapies, focused on drugs, focused on disease conditions and states. So they probably won't change what pharmaceutical companies do, but it may lengthen the process in some way. So that's great questions. Thank you, Roger. Thank you, Chana. If you have other questions, type those in. I'm happy to talk about them. Some of the, oh, another one just popped in. It seems like magic whenever I talk about questions, they come. So maybe it's a good prompting to do. This question says, as the spread continues, are patients' pre-existing conditions helping identify those at more risk than others, especially at the point of care? Again, that's a pretty broad question, and something that I'm not a doctor, so I'm not really qualified to give you a medical answer. So nothing that I say should be construed as you're welcome, Chana, as medical advice. There are a long list of comorbidities and pre-existing conditions that put people at further risk for COVID. The list is long. I've seen multiple lists, and many of them are different. They include things like diabetes and high blood pressure and heart conditions and things like that. So I know that the healthcare providers are aware of that, and they are probably taking that into account whenever they're providing care to the individual patients. So that's as far as I can go with that one. Did you use any model that exists in RStudio? We do use RStudio, as a matter of fact. And I do think that we used the neural net from RStudio, or coded our neural net in R. Our team has the way we do it in our team, our data science team, each data scientist has a language they prefer. It's usually R or Python. And then they have a second language that they use, and that's usually R or Python. So you have some of the data scientists who prefer R, some who prefer Python, but all of them are proficient and efficient in both of those languages. I think it rolled down a little bit. Let me come back up here. Okay. Hegler, great name, Hegler. ML has become more and more used, but explainability remains a big challenge for certain use cases. Do your models have any features that explain the resulting predictions? Great question. I'm actually working on this outside of anything that I do on CSL. As you're probably all aware, you've looked at my bio. I've been doing this for over 30 years. So I'm doing some consulting with a couple small companies that are actually working on explainable AI. And the approaches that I've seen that have really shown some really very good promise are where you're taking multiple algorithms and putting them together for explainable effect. One of the most promising that I've seen so far is you take a neural net that's doing a good job in predicting something, but you can't explain how it predicts it, and you team it with a decision tree. So you use the decision tree to look at the hyperparameters and the different tuning situations, and it allows you to get in there and do a very good job of explaining what the neural net is doing. This work is not done. It's still in the lab. It's still ongoing development. So I think in the next 1.5 to 2 years, we're going to see some really good explainable AI technology out there. So great question. Carolyn asks, I'm curious about the books at the end of your desk. What are you reading? These books over here? Yeah. All right, that's funny. I never had anybody ask me about these. The first one is Think Like a Rocket Scientist. The next one is The Inner Game of Tennis. Smart or Lucky by Judith Hurwitz. String Theory, which is a book about tennis, as a matter of fact. And then Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning. So quite an eclectic group of books there. I just had them there because those are the ones I anticipate reading, as I get through the current book that I'm reading. So thanks for asking that. Rita, do you find resistance when moving AI analytics from research to broad clinical use? That's a great question. We have spent most of our time over the last 2 years working on applications that are in the plasma operations, manufacturing, supply chain, those kind of things. So I don't have experience in moving an AI model into the clinical side of our business. We do see, and I've written about in my latest book, Building Analytics Teams, which is right here behind me, that over the years I've been doing this, where the most analytical projects fail, and this is really interesting if you think about it, is not when you start the project or not when you do the modeling, but actually when you go to take that model and put it into production. That is where the most of the projects fall apart. And I think, Rita, you're actually alluding to some of those problems that you see. You'd actually couched it in the clinical use, but I see it across the board. So yes, and I talk about that a great deal in my book about going from the AI modeling side, which I consider a very creative endeavor, to the production side of the business, which is a compliance-driven, regulatory, efficiency and effectiveness-driven environment. So you have a creative environment and a process-driven environment. And what's really hard for people to do is to understand that you can't merge those two seamlessly, that you actually have to have a buffer in there. You have to take the creative side, you have to, make it production ready, and then you have to insert it into the production system in a way that preserves the compliance, the regulatory issues, the efficiency, the effectiveness, all those kind of things. And usually what you have in that situation is you have the advanced analytics team, you have the subject matter experts, and then you have the IT department. And all of those people need to work together. And anytime you have those three groups working together, it can be a little bit challenging. You're welcome, Roger. Thanks for asking the question. We have another question that's come in. Have you had any experience incorporating RPA into hospitals? Thanks, Anthony. As a matter of fact, no. I work in a pharmaceutical company. We have experience in working with RPA, and we used RPA to automate a number of our processes, usually very routine processes where you don't need a whole lot of human intervention. They work very well, and we've done a lot with RPA, I should say, is robotic process automation. So while nothing to do with hospitals, but certainly a lot to do with internal processes and automation. Thanks, Anthony, for asking that question. Amin, I think is how you say your name. Did you think about data-enabled business models rather than AI as a business process optimization tool? I'm gonna have to think about that for a second. Data-enabled business models rather than AI as a business process optimization tool. No, I've never thought about it in that light. As a matter of fact, that's why I had to read the question twice. I am a big fan of data-enabled businesses, and if you follow me on LinkedIn, and I encourage all of you to connect with me on LinkedIn. I posted a white paper today from February of 2020, which is the European Union's new framework on the data trusts that they anticipate building over the next 5 years in Europe. So the use of data-enabled businesses, and privacy and personal democratization and monetization of data is going to be some very big topics over the next few years. So thanks for asking that. Next question comes in from Yogesh. Let me see. Is your company using AI or a data model to target a specific type of designation during the drug submission approval process, e.g. orphan drug designation, to improve the chances of getting the intended designation? If so, how does this AI algorithm model work in layman's terms? I've had some conversations about that, and I've spoken to our clinical team and our R&D team about that, but we haven't actually moved into production in that area. So not sure what model we would use, not sure what data we would actually use, but we are having initial conversations. So Yogesh, if you're asking that question and we're thinking about it, it is clearly something that is in the market that we'll all probably be thinking about working on in the future, but not yet. That's coming down the pipe, as a matter of fact. Any more questions? Happy to take any more, but also happy to just talk about another use case in the next 5 minutes that we've got together. All right, well, I'll start outlining another use case that we undertook. As I said, CSL produces therapies, plasma-based therapies for a number of rare diseases. And we have a number of programs that are help patients understand and persist and comply with their therapies. And obviously, you're welcome, Yogesh. Thanks for asking. We obviously have all been affected by COVID, and some of these programs have been curtailed and suspended in the short term, but they'll be back to help patients after the COVID pandemic subsides. And we were looking at all the different programs that were giving patients a better understanding to how to administer their therapies. And some of these are subcutaneous, where you inject yourself. And we had looked at a variety of different programs. I think there were 10 or 12 that were being, given to patients as options. And what we found was that there was one, above all, that when patients had this support program, they complied and persisted on their therapies across the entire age bracket of patients in the cohort. Some of them complied and persisted at 80% higher rates than the people who did not have this program. And it was interesting because we were talking to the commercial team, and the commercial team are the people that, budget and fund these kinds of activities. And we laid out all the different programs and the ones that were most effective, and they were quite surprised. They really thought that this one program that had such a dramatic effect on the patients in a positive way, they were actually wondering if they should continue with that program. So after we did our project and showed our results, they came back and said, yes, we are going to fund that. That's a great idea. We're going to continue to do it. So we're very excited about it. So those are the 3 use cases I was going to talk about today: forecasting application, the identifying patients, and then the persistence and compliance of existing patients being supported by different programs to help them understand their therapies and raise their quality of life. So we've got about 2.5 minutes left. This is a great time. If you have any additional questions that you might want to tap in there, I'm happy to take those. I think I've mentioned the book, Building Analytics Teams. I wrote my first book that I wrote was in 2017. Called Analytics, How to Win with Intelligence. And when that came out on Amazon in June of 2017, it went to #1. And over the last 3 years, it's remained in the top 15 to 20 books in the analytics category on Amazon. So that is a book which is, it's about 200 pages, just under 200 pages. And it's a primer for executives to understand how to invest in an analytics function, who you should hire, how much money to invest. The most recent book is called Building Analytics Teams. It was released on June 30th, and it has, since its release, has remained in the top 1% of all books on Amazon. So it's turned out to be a very popular book. And that book is for people like you, people who are on data science teams, people who are leading data science teams. It helps people understand the roadblocks. We talked about moving into production. We've talked about different modeling techniques. We didn't talk about stakeholder management and things like that, but that's in the book as well. So if you're interested in those books, they're both on Amazon. You can go out and search for John K. Thompson, check them out. And I really have appreciated this time and your questions. It really makes it much easier to have an interactive discussion when the audience is, contributing and asking questions and being part of the dialogue. So I can certainly sit here and talk for days and days and days on analytics and data. I certainly love the topic and I'm passionate about it, but it's always better when we have a two-way dialogue. So thank you very much for your questions. Thank you, Rita. Thank you, Carolyn. I've really appreciated spending this time with you. And at that, I'll wrap it up. And we got 30 seconds before the session ends. And thank you very much. Have a great day.